Thank you. Thanks. So you may have seen me around, and now you know my name is Mr. Ebling, and not that one hipster teacher,
Sure.
which I know you guys call me.
Sorry, I had to get a mic.
That's all right.
Am I good?
Welcome.
Okay.
And this is my friend Nate, who finally made his way to the center of the stage. And we do a podcast called Can We Still Be Friends? And it's about movies. And how many of you guys have heard of podcasts? All right. People
A
in the
solid
a lot of
majority,
people,
I would say.
And how many people actually listen to podcasts? Oh, wow. Period. You're
few
bringing
less,
it.
but yeah.
Unless some of you are lying to us. But Nate, why don't you tell the people whose hands didn't go up what a podcast
Sure.
is?
How do you advance this thing?
At this point.
Oh, okay. What are podcasts, and why should you care? Okay, so podcasts have actually been around for probably at least 10 or 15 years or so, pretty much ever since iTunes has kind of been around. And podcasts are something that were kind of popular right away, and then they kind of tapered off for a while, but now they're sort of gaining a whole new popularity because it's so easy now with smartphones and tablets, really anything that you can put an app on, for anyone to be able to put a free app on and find any podcast that they could possibly be interested in, subscribe to that podcast. And a podcast, and for this presentation's purposes, we're mostly talking about audio podcasts. So it's kind of like listening to an audio episode of something. Mm-hmm. But that something could be created by anyone. So you could go out today and decide, I want to have a podcast about whatever. Doesn't even matter what it's about. And you could actually record it, put it up online. People could subscribe to your podcast the same way they would maybe follow you on Twitter or like you on Facebook or whatever. And every time that you put up a new episode of your podcast, anyone who subscribes to your podcast is going to have that delivered to them, and they can listen to it whenever they want. So what it's really done in a lot of ways is level the playing fields of who gets to say what out there, because you don't have to be hired by a radio station. You don't have to be hired by a TV network or have any sort of degree or credentials or anything to really do a podcast. If you've got some bare bones basic recording equipment and a computer and an internet connection, you can actually start broadcasting your voice.
Yeah, there's no internships, no like foot in the door. And a few podcasts that we like, there's one called WTF with Mark Maron, and it's one of the bigger podcasts out there. It started in 2009 when Mark Maron got fired from his radio job. He was a stand-up comedian, is a stand-up comedian, who didn't really like where his career was, didn't have a job now, and all he could think to do was record interviews with his friends, and his friends happened to be famous comedians and actors and things. And so in 2009, he just started doing that. He would sneak into the radio station he got fired from and record, and now he records out of his garage. And his podcasts are like an hour and a half long sometimes. He rants about his life, complains about things, talks about his cats for like 20 minutes, maybe longer if he's really feeling...
Love his cats, yeah.
He loves his cats, yeah. But he's also a really interesting interviewer, and because he's not on the radio, they can talk about their drug addiction or their sex addictions or like whatever they talk about that makes them who they are. They can be sometimes explicit, so I guess to cover our tail ends, we're not suggesting you listen to it, but it's a really good one. It's the first podcast to reach 100 million downloads, which is pretty huge. And in the 6 years he's done it, he's got like 600 episodes coming up. Another really famous, influential podcast was Serial, and it only came out last year. And it was 10 episodes told over time. So each episode would add to part of the story. And that took off. Like, it got really popular, almost surprisingly popular. And in 1 month, they had 39 million listeners. And it continues to be downloaded today. And the third one on there is Film Spotting, which started in 2005 by two film writers. And it got picked up by National Public Radio. And it's really the podcast that inspires us, which is to say we copy from it pretty much, just like two guys talking about movies. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. How hard can it be?
Right. Not that hard, actually. And the other cool thing about podcasts is that with so many podcasts out there, you can find or create a podcast about anything you want. There's a podcast about the Serial podcast. There are podcasts about the TV show Better Call Saul, like multiple podcasts that just come out every episode and they talk about it. So whatever you talk about that your friends are like, yeah, Okay, whenever you start
Enough
talking
already,
about it.
yeah.
Yeah, like dank memes. If you can't get enough of talking about dank memes, and your friends are sick of hearing about it, and yes, we saw that one, you can make a podcast about it, and some fellow dank meme lovers are going to be out there downloading it and loving what you have to say.
So your audience might be very small,
Right.
but it will be an engaged audience,
Yeah.
and it'll be people who actually really want to hear what you have to say. And so, there's a couple of things that come with that, one of which is that you are in sort of a sea of other podcasts, so what you make actually does have to be somewhat good
Yeah.
and listenable for people to listen to it, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how we try to do that.
Right.
But overall, the whole point is you can have a podcast about anything, and in the days of radio, you might have had to have a topic that was very universally liked so that they would get enough listeners. But now you don't have to worry about that. You can have a podcast about absolutely anything.
Yeah. So let's go on to how we got into podcasting. I went to college for English and communications and studied a little bit of journalism. And while I was in college, I wrote movie reviews for the college paper. And I did that partly because I liked movies, but mostly because I didn't have to go anywhere and interview people or be someplace to research a story. So it was the easiest thing, and they paid for my movie tickets. After college, I also wrote for a local paper. All they did was pay for my movie ticket, but that was fine. So I really got into movie criticism and liking movies and writing about movies and thinking about movies and talking about movies. And when you start out writing, almost like anything, you kind of mimic people that you admire. So there were writers that I'll say mimic, but I pretty much just stole from them. Like I stole their format, but it's sort of like you do when you learn an instrument. You don't learn 3 chords and then you're writing your first song, most of us. You usually learn other people's songs first. Or like if you're an athlete, you watch a team play and then you go outside and you're like, Kobe, and you try to imitate what they do. And then it becomes a part of how you actually create. I ended up sort of just mimicking people and losing my voice completely, but that's, I don't know. I just wasn't careful, I guess. And Nate, your journey is a little bit more circuitous,
Yeah,
right?
let me tell you about my journey. So actually,
I think you need to squat down.
right, gather round for my journey. But if there's one thing that I can kind of stress in this whole presentation, it's that we don't have any actual specific credentials or really any specific training that got us ready to start to try to do a podcast, but it was kind of picking up a lot of skills in other things that I was doing, maybe skills that I picked up because I had to pick them up or because I, was maybe semi-interested in them, that then were able to be sort of all pooled together to give me the skills I needed to start a podcast. So I guess the point is that you have no idea what you're learning right now that you could maybe apply to something down the road that you're actually passionate about. So for instance, like what I was really passionate about when I was in college and high school was playing music, and I was a guitar player, and I wanted to be a rock star. And that's all I wanted to do was be a rock star. So I got a band, we recorded, we tried to tour.
You did tour.
Didn't go so well. Didn't go so well.
Festivals.
But but in the process, kind of as a side thing, I had to learn web design, because our band needed a website. And those are the skills that I actually use now. And, there's a lot of things that are just kind of like that. When it came to film, I took a film class in college because I just wanted an easy credit. I wanted to take an easy class. And I had no idea going into it that it was going to be the class that sort of changed my life and made me into this big film geek that all I ever wanted to talk about was movies. Superstar podcaster.
Yeah.
Maybe someday. So, and then even when it comes to like reading film reviews and things, like I used to read them all the time, but it was just a matter of trying to figure out whether it was a movie I wanted to go see. I didn't think about film criticism as an art form, but just my casual reading of them is all stuff that informs what we do now with the podcast.
Yeah, and it was actually in that film class that Nate and I first sort of encountered each other. We knew each other in college, but this is how we kind of got started on our podcast. We didn't know each other very well in college because we both assumed the other person was a jerk and didn't like us.
I still assume that. But.
Yeah, he still thinks that about me, and he's not wrong. But we thought that we were, kind of threatened by the other person's movie tastes or whatever, but we
Right.
never talked to each other. And it wasn't until after college that we had common friends and we couldn't get away from each other. And we ended up talking about movies, and we're like, oh, you kind of make sense. And we would talk about movies that we disagreed on, and we would kind of go back and watch those movies based on what they said. So, oh, you know what, you were actually kind of right. And we liked that idea that when we were thinking of the podcast, we liked the idea that you can hear somebody else's ideas and change your opinion, because be it about movies or anything else, we don't like to change your opinions because for some reason we think it's weak. And
So once you decide how you feel about a movie,
yeah, you don't change it.
that's how you feel for the rest of your life,
Or
you know.
a people group or whatever. And you're right, and those people are evil, and, you know, especially in movie criticism, people really hold to their opinions. So we wanted to do a thing where we could show that you can talk about things and have an open mind.
So that's kind of how we started with our format. And that's, if you're going to have a podcast, that's one thing you definitely have to do is just come up with a format, whatever it is. And there are really no written rules for podcasting because it's such a new form. So that format can be a lot of different things. But one thing we realized is, you know, we kind of had to work within our limitations. Like, we don't get new movies sent to us like a lot of film critics do.
If you know how we can do that, let us know.
We'd love to hear it. So we kind of had to decide within our limitations, our podcast had to be revisiting older films. So even your limitations can sometimes work to help you figure out what your angle is, what your format needs to be. And we would also, you know, take a lot of feedback from listeners who were listening first off and just kind of try to figure out what works for us, what isn't. Our podcast has evolved over time, even though we've only been doing it for about a year. And so once we kind of settled on a format, we kind of had to figure out the other things we had to get in place, one of which, oh, by the way, this is our little studio setup.
Yeah.
It's an office at my house, but we do have mugs.
It's a
which
card
is-
table, yeah. Nate's wife made mugs.
So those are
for
kind of
us.
cool. But really, as you can see, it's not really too complicated of a setup. It's basically a home recording setup. So we had to get basically all that equipment together.
I don't even know what I'm doing in that picture. I
What
look
are you
like
doing?
I'm waiting for a hug. You have to show it
And I'm
again.
not giving it.
No,
Um,
you're not.
The other thing we realized is that if you have a podcast and you basically really have to try to get your voice out there. It's not enough just to put the podcast out. You might get a few listeners, but if you're trying to grow your audience, promotion becomes really key. And so we are on Twitter and we're on Facebook, and you could follow us if you'd like. CWSBF is our Twitter handle.
Yeah.
But really, we just use that to kind of engage with our audience. People reply to us and like what we post sometimes.
Yeah, and you have
know.
to be a little shameless, you know, like we'll send tweets to film writers that we like, oh, I saw you wrote about Braveheart. Why don't you listen to our episode about Braveheart?
Right.
And like 9 times out of 10, we don't hear anything back. But we did hear back from one of the film spotting guys,
Yeah.
so that was pretty cool, and he actually listened and gave us some feedback.
Sort of one of our podcasting heroes
Right.
listened to one of our episodes and gave us a lot of feedback, which is another thing you find in the podcasting community is it's a very close community. Like, people do talk to each other.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So how we write is, you know, not real sophisticated. There are those people, you know, who like, you've heard it this week, like, writing is just how I breathe. And I have to get up every morning, and if I don't write, I haven't lived. And Nate and I are like, I really like writing because I think I have a good time getting my thoughts out there.
But I also like House of
I
Cards,
also
and I like to sit on the
watching
couch.
TV and not writing. It's a lot easier. Nobody tells you this. It's a lot easier to not write than to write. But Nate and I have found, we started a website a while ago with a bunch of people, and we're like, we're going to put our thoughts about film and music on this website. And it worked for a couple months where we all gung-ho about it. But we didn't really have anybody holding us accountable. Nobody was saying, like, hey, you have to get this article in by now. So it really tapered off because we had a lot,
We're procrastinators
a
by
serious lack
nature,
of
yeah.
ambition, yeah. So we found that working together is the way to get both of us off our butts and writing.
We give ourselves deadlines. We
Yeah.
decide dates we're going to record. And that's the thing is, for a lot of you, maybe whether it's writing or any sort of creative endeavor you decide to pursue, you might realize that it has to be done with a lot of other people around you. And that's just as valid as being that sole lone writer cooped up in your room, you know, writing the next great American novel.
Yeah.
You know, this is just as valuable to actually just have someone that you work with on things.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's how we found we would be motivated to do it. If we if we had somebody else who would be there on the day, and if I wasn't ready for it, then it wouldn't happen. And the way we actually prepare for the episodes is sort of different too. I mean, we watch the movies so that we can talk about them, but I just have this little notebook that I write down individual thoughts, and they might just be random questions like, what's with that dog in that scene? And Nate, you actually kind of, you take much more
Right.
involved notes, and you almost write an essay before
Yeah, we
you
kind of,
get
I
there.
mean, that's something we had to figure out, was that's the way you work best when we actually come to record our podcast episode. But for me, in order for me to actually feel like I can actually articulate what I want to say, I need to write it out. And even if it's garbage, even if my thoughts about the movie, it's not even coming out well, I just realize that I just need to write it, because in the actual process of writing out my thoughts itself, it helps my mind kind of organize what I want to say. And in my mind, what I want to say is brilliant. It's always brilliant, what I want to say.
Yeah.
But when I'm writing it out, I realize, oh, the way I would have just said it if I would have just got on the mic and started talking made absolutely no sense. So for me, writing out that little bit of an essay is my process.
And my process actually continues through the recording, because I do a much better job feeding off of Nate's preparation, which sounds super lazy. And you guys who do all the group work and somebody else is like, no, I'll have my part done. You know, my type of person. But it actually works for us, because if we both wrote an essay, it would just sound like two dudes reading essays and not actually having a conversation. So we kind of married our writing styles together.
But one other thing that we realized is that when it comes to writing, just as important, if not sometimes more important, is editing. You have to edit what you're doing. And in our case, we are doing an audio podcast. So the final piece of writing, if you take it, is a piece of audio that people will listen to. So we edit the heck out of...
Nate does. I don't edit anything.
Okay, as a podcast, our podcast is heavily edited. So I just have a screenshot here. This is the last episode we did. And really the only thing I want to say out of this is that we have to, if you're going to start something, any sort of project, you have to be kind of your own worst critic. You have to be willing to make the hard choices to say, even if what I maybe said here was brilliant, it doesn't fit with the overall episode, or it doesn't fit with the overall chapter, or whatever it is you're working on, and you got to be willing to just cut ruthlessly. Your final product will be better for it. This right here is only the first 4 minutes of the episode, and you can see how many, all those little chunks are where we cut something out, whether it was just dead space, or whether it was, noticing that someone said like or a lot, and it was very distracting, so we would take some of those words out. And it's also where we would actually bring in like our theme music, and we bring in clips from the movie, because sometimes I'll use clips just to, you'll realize that our conversation is getting a little long and boring, so I'll cut it somewhere and put a clip from the movie in to kind of break up the monotony of it.
And the music actually was written and recorded and performed by Nate as well, so that's another way that podcasting affords you flexibility in what you can do. If you want to, write poems and read them and present that as a podcast, you can. But you can also create your own music, invite people like the people we've seen up here who write music, get them involved in your podcast. Sorry, I didn't want to. You can keep talking about editing if you want to talk about
That's
editing.
all I got to say about editing. It's just very, very important to whatever you do.
Yes. And the other cool thing about podcasting, like we said, the rules are not written yet, and that you guys can do what you want. You can explore as many times as you want. There's no, this is it, this is your last episode, or else we're canceling you. You can just keep making episodes and keep trying stuff out. If you just want to sit around a mic with 5 of your friends and improvise a scene for 3 hours and put that on the internet, that's fine. People do that. There are 4-hour podcasts, there are 10-minute podcasts. You can just keep doing what you do until you find your audience.
Yeah, one thing before, that's kind of, I think, maybe all we really have to say about our podcast for now. But one thing I want, if you're kind of interested in maybe getting into podcasts and you're thinking, I'd love to do it, the only thing holding me back is I don't have that gear. I don't have the equipment. I work at the library. I'm a librarian at the library just around the corner. And we just launched at Cook Library our new digital studios. And I just wanted to make you aware that we have this stuff available for all of you guys. If you have a Cook Library card, you can book time in here. You can use microphones. There's a keyboard. You can do music if you want. There's tablets where you can draw. If you're a graphic artist, you can draw onto the computer. We've got even like GoPros and camcorders and stuff that you can check out and take out of the library. So we're at the library trying to level the playing field even more, where if you have an idea and you want to get it out creatively and it has to do with audio or video, we've got a place for you to actually come and do it for free.
And
Oh, and as a sort of a success story of that, if you've heard of like Chance the Rapper, he came out of Chicago Public Library's U Media Center. They have a media lab, kind of like what we have at the library, and that's where he got his start. He didn't have the recording equipment, but he was a really good rapper, and so he went to the library, used their space. There was a librarian there that kind of took him under his wing and said, you should really go for this, and now he's Chance the Rapper. So
yeah, so you could be the next Chance the Rapper.
yeah, maybe.
And so do we have any questions about podcasting or movies? I think I see a hand back there. Go for it. All the way. Yeah, they do have video podcasts. Is that what you're asking?
You could, if you have, the thing is with a video, you're always going to be playing it on a video player of some sort, whether it's YouTube or, people have like channels they subscribe to on YouTube, which is very similar. That's basically like a video podcast.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to do audio, you would just have to find a way to record audio and kind of put that into your video.
Yeah, and still have, but there's not really like plays a video for a while, then it's just sound unless you just want to make a black screen for a while. But you can put video podcasts on iTunes. Like the process is very similar. Does that answer your question? Okay. Caitlin? Hey. Well, not a million. We've had about like 14,000 downloads, I think.
Yeah, the average episode tends to kind of immediately get up to about 150 downloads, and then over time it usually plateaus around 250 to 300.
I'd say it plateaus around 400 to 500.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's go with that. Yeah.
So
I like your numbers.
can we get the lights a bit? I think there's somebody smack dab in the middle of the room.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's about as funny as this. So however
probably
you
not.
feel, we're not going to promise anything more.
It's a very
Sometimes-
serious intellectual discussion of
Absolutely, yeah.
film, being the
We-
scholars that we are.
We
So-
hold our tea close and we talk very quietly, and we. Sometimes the films we discuss aren't so funny, but whatever. I mean, we try to have fun with it. We don't want to be boring.
Try not to be.
Try not to be.
That's the goal.
Caitlin, did you steal somebody's question? Is he coming here? No, I know a lot of people have talked about Chance the Rapper this week. Nope, he's not coming. This wasn't like a secret Writers Week thing. Actually, I'm just kidding. Chance, come on out.
Is that? Oh, you're. Oh.
Any other questions? Still in the back. That is a good question.
What was the question?
How do you get people to follow you? Well, we got most of our listeners when we were put on the iTunes New and Noteworthy page.
Yeah.
I don't know how that process happens, but
Well, when you're first starting out, the first thing you have to do is try to get into as many different podcasting apps
Yes.
and things as possible. So all podcasts use something called an RSS feed. It's basically the sort of technology that broadcasts out your podcast. And then they call them podcatchers, will sort of collect all of that. And so like iTunes is a podcatcher.
Yeah.
And there's another one called Stitcher, and there's a bunch of other ones that you can even pay for nice features in your individual podcasting app. So when you're making a podcast, you kind of have to go through all those little ones and just make sure that your podcast has been submitted. A lot of times they'll just have a form that you fill out, and you give them your RSS feed, and then within a matter of like a day or two, your podcast shows up in all of these podcatchers.
Yeah, so you want to make sure your podcast is as many places as possible, but then the other thing is just being aggressive on like Twitter, Facebook, not like harassment aggressive, but just like keep posting, say like new episodes coming out, or like asking questions of people that are gonna get the conversation started.
And to be honest, a lot of times it starts out with the people you physically know.
Right.
Like your friends start listening. And word of mouth, and that goes with anything that you make or push. Word of mouth is always going to be the best mode of advertisement ever.
Yeah, one of the weirdest things is when we got an email or something and we're like, do you know this person? Like, I don't know this person. We're like, oh, huh.
A stranger listening to us.
Somebody's
Yeah.
listening, and now it feels weird. and invasive. Any other questions? Yeah, all the way over on the side.
How often do you podcast? Like,
We try to do 2 a month.
2 a month?
Yeah,
But that's like, that's just us.
right.
There's podcasts, they'll almost do it daily.
WTF is twice a week. Yeah, some people do daily podcasts.
Some
and
people do them every few months,
We're busy people. Your papers won't grade themselves. We don't make money. We do it because we love it. No, you can make money. People will get advertisers. Advertisers will post on your website. We have not pursued that.
And there's not a lot of money in it at first, no matter
No.
who you are, usually.
Yeah, another one. What?
What is it?
It's a song Nate wrote.
It's just a jingle I recorded in
Yeah.
a GarageBand.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.